G'day, everybody. It's AD here, just doing another episode of Better People, Better Business, something that we hope will help you understand you a bit better, understand the teams and your organisation. Today, I have the absolute delight and pleasure to be talking to a most amazing individual, Corrinne Armour, who is, apart from someone who I deeply admire, her work is around fearless leadership. She's a leading thinker in that space. Corrinne does work around speaking, mentoring, facilitating. She's authored a couple of books, Leaders Who Ask and Developing Direct Reports, both well worth the read, and we'll stick links to those things in the show notes below. I think I'm using the right words there. Corinne's had over 10 years in corporate leadership roles, which is interesting. It gets even more interesting, 2.5 years living and teaching in a jungle refugee camp on the edge of a warzone. Fascinating lessons that can be learned through that. And almost 15 years in and out of boardrooms working with senior leaders. She's gained a lot to share with her audiences. Corinne's really strong on waging a war on the wasted potential. Their mission is to spark people to play their big game by developing fearless leadership. She's passionate about helping leaders connect deeply, lead fearlessly, and achieve results that transform. Hello, Corrinne.
Hello, Andrew. I feel like I should curtsy, except that I've got jeans on, and B, I'm sitting on a stool. But otherwise, yes. I would curtsy.
We'll take it as a curtsy given. No, it's delightful to have you here. And for people who, we've got a nice little brief intro there, and I think they'll get to know a little bit more of you as we have this conversation. And as we launch in, my first question for you is, the frame of this podcast is Better People, Better Business. For you, what does that mean? The work you do, the way you look at the world, the work you do with organizations, what does better people, better business mean?
I think business is a construct of people. Like you can't have a business without having people, like the people in it. Like even if you're a solopreneur and there's just one of you, like you're a people. And yes, then, who are you selling to? Like we talk about B2B. No, we're selling one business to another business, but we're actually selling one person representing one business to another person or people representing another business. So to me, a business is people. So it kind of feels like stating the obvious that if you have better people, and I don't know that, from a value perspective, any people are better than any other people. So let's talk about better invested in, better supported, better led people, then you're going to have a better business.
Nice. So in the space that you work with, particularly around waging a war on wasted potential, how does that play out? Like you talked about some of the different frames of better, and I love that, and it's really helpful. And the intention is absolutely, it's about what does better mean in regard to people. What kind of work do you? What's your thoughts around how do we get better people? How do we get people better?
Yeah. So as you said in the introduction, my space is fearless leadership, which is that accessing untapped potential. Like it's untapped potential in me, untapped potential in the people that I lead, in the business that I'm running, in the community that I am working in and for. So fearless leadership is about that courageous step to have the conversations that matter, like the conversations that build trust and move us forward. So my way of helping us to have better people and better businesses is predominantly working with the leadership teams to leverage the potential. Like it's interesting when I think about the evolution, and you've seen this, I'm sure, in the work that you've done, Andrew. We talked a lot about inclusion. We talked a lot about diversity. Like we need different people. And initially it was why? Because I'm pretty smart, and it would be much better if we just had more people like me, because then we would have lots of smart people. Yeah. And then we got at least to an intellectual understanding, evidenced by a lot of research that says diverse teams operate better. So, okay, great, let's diversity. So we'll bring in someone who's a bit different. And in my space, when I'm working with leadership teams, diversity for me predominantly means thinking diversity. Now that might come from gender diversity, diversity in sexuality, diversity in backgrounds, education, etc. So diversity comes from different places, but I'm predominantly focusing on thinking diversity. And so we've got diverse people, but it turns out it's actually bloody hard work to work with someone who's different to me. I'd much rather, like, it's much more fun working with people who are just like me, because I say, hey, Andrew, I've been having this idea, and you go, yeah, love
That's
it.
Awesome, Corrinne.
It's awesome. Let's do it. We'll get bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's no check in that. There's no, might this work? Or, okay, I get you're thinking about it this way. I'm thinking about it that way. And now we're really understanding. And when I say we, I'm talking about leaders, not all leaders. I think we're understanding now that diversity isn't enough. We have to work out how we actually can work together. So and that then takes us to inclusion. Like, let's have some diverse people around, in my case, around the leadership team. And then how do we make sure we're including everybody? How do we make sure that everybody is bringing their best? How do we make sure that the conversations that we're having, the decisions that we're making, are drawing on the potential of the whole team? And that's where that fearless leadership then involves bringing in that diversity, so that we're including and we're leveraging the diversity. We're moving from diversity is, different is wrong, to different is opportunity, then to difference is our strength. And we can leverage that and have one really strong, powerful, aligned leadership team.
And it's an interesting frame that love it. So thank you. There's this piece around diversity, and again, really clear there around diversity of thinking. It's a piece that sits above a lot of the other more politically talked about diversity challenges. This diversity of thinking sits across and above them all. Again, like one of the other podcasts, we talked to Callum McCurdy, who talks about neurodiversity, which again is another way of talking about that. And I think Callum agreed with this, is we're all neurodiverse. Some are more categorized, but we all are, as to your point. One of the questions I have, around diversity, and you hit on it, and it's a piece that one of the things I've seen for a long time is we talk about D&I corporately. It's this sort of cool little thing that seems to go together. It's kind of like HSE, people forget there's 3 different parts or more there, D&I, and yet for the last couple of decades, all we've really talked about is D. And D in a pretty shallow kind of way. The question or the interest I have is when we sort of start talking about I, inside a frame of fearless leadership, what is the I? How do you address the I? Because this is psychological safety, safe space, all those other types of ideas. But how does an I play out with the work?
So I think about fearless leadership when it comes to leadership teams. There's 4 key levers we've got to pull. Purpose, motivation, communication, and trust. So inclusion is about involving everybody, but why? Like, why should we? What are we trying to achieve? For what purpose? And so purpose to me is critical. And I remember when I first started to work with executive teams, I expected they would be really clear on their purpose. And it surprised me that they weren't. And then it disappointed me as I found that actually, the first few teams that I was working with that weren't clear on their purpose were not unusual. And now I go in on an assumption that it's unlikely you will have a clear purpose as a leadership team. Sometimes the individuals have a clear purpose. So I know what I'm here to achieve. I know what I stand for. And most of the time, there's a clear organizational purpose. But this level in the middle, which is the purpose of the team, is unclear. So until the leadership team is really clear, like, are we all here because we're all executives and we're together because we will report to Andrew, who's the CEO? Like, that's not a good purpose. Am I here because I'm the head of industrial manufacturing and I'm here to lobby for resources for industrial manufacturing? Or am I here? Yes, I have the most experience and knowledge about industrial manufacturing of all of my peers, but I'm here as part of a leadership team. So I think So to your question, how does the I come in? Firstly, we need to know, why are we here together? Like, what is the purpose of this team? And until we know that, then we don't know how to include people and why we should. So that's the first thing.
It's powerful.
The second thing is motivation. What motivates me in the context of work? What motivates you individually? What motivates us as a team? If we don't understand one another's motivators, then it's much harder to work together, and it's much harder to include one another. So I use a motivational profiling tool that looks at 48 different motivations in the context of work. And it's really interesting as we start to unpack that. You can just see the light bulbs going off as leaders go, so I'm not wrong and you're not wrong. And you're not deliberately, when I get all excited and start to talk conceptually about this new idea and you go straight to what's the plan, you're not being difficult. You're just motivated to think structurally, and I'm motivated to think conceptually. Yeah. So when we start to unpack motivations, that builds self-awareness. And sometimes people say to me, surely by the time you get to executive team level, you've got that level of self-awareness. Yes, that would be nice. And no, that is generally not the case. And even for people who are very self-aware, there's no end to this. The more self-awareness you have, the more you realize there's still more to know.
Yeah, which is the journey of better, isn't it?
Absolutely, the journey of better.
It's not best. It's not the ceiling. It's better.
It's not the end. Yeah.
And I know, just to interrupt for a second, I remember sitting in myself, having started on the floor in organisation and finally reaching some dizzy heights in corporate space. Same conversation. You think back then, I thought these people must be super clever and super organised and super aware and just A game. And they're still people. They're still just people, and some of them, and they're all great at certain things and gifted at certain things and able at certain things, but collectively, they're still just people. Yeah. They still make mistakes. They still have their own agendas. All of that stuff played out at every single level as I moved up the organisation. It's quite fascinating, isn't it? And the motivation one it's a beautiful way to. I suspect when you're talking to people, it's not just, isn't it interesting how you're motivated? I suspect a whole bunch of them are going, oh, that's why I behave like that.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Yeah. That probably explains a whole bunch of stuff here, home, sporting field, wherever.
Absolutely.
Yes. As my team will say, like Andrew's often, I'm often the wanderer. The conceptual, what are shiny things?
Yeah.
Whereas they're going, can we put in the box?
We agreed this. Yeah.
Sorry, Corrinne. But that's really cool. So that was the second piece, motivation.
So that's motivation, building individual awareness and then building team awareness. And I think that is probably the single biggest contribution to inclusion at a leadership team level in the first instance. Like that's the 101 version. Yep. Communication is how we communicate with one another, obviously, formally and informally. It's also about our expectations of one another. Like one of my favourite words is thwarted. And it's a good day when I get to say thwarted, and it's only 10:30 in the morning. So today is going to be a great day.
Early win. When we're angry, when we're frustrated, when we're disappointed, that's usually a thwarted expectation. And I expected something of you that you didn't provide. And so I'm frustrated, I'm pissed off, I'm whatever level of energy is involved. And it might be something overt, like you committed that your team would have a deliverable that then needs to be worked on by my team to then be completed. Like it might be something quite practical, structural, and clearly agreed, and you let me down. Or it might actually be that in my world, a classic example, coaching an executive. Most of the work I do is with teams, but I reserve capacity each quarter to take on 3 clients one-on-one. So I'm working with an executive
And she was lamenting that the CEO and one of her peers hadn't called her back when she'd called after hours. And I said, okay. And she said, because they would know, like I would only call after hours if it were important. Like, wouldn't you think they would call me back? Turns out she didn't leave a message. And she didn't leave a message because in her mind, to have called in the first place indicated a need to talk. Whereas, and so she was feeling like she wasn't being valued. And I said to her, my suggestion is you go and have a conversation with the CEO and you go and have a conversation with the colleague who has not returned your calls a number of times. And the response was pretty much, oh, you didn't leave a message, so I didn't think it was important. Now, that's such a basic example that you can roll your eyes and say, oh, come on, get real. Typically, it's the small things that trip us up. She had an expectation that her call would be returned. They had an expectation that if it's important, you would leave a message. And so when we're really clear around the executive table, what do we expect from one another? Like, what are the 3 to 5 absolute fundamentals of how we engage with one another, like team norms, rules of the sandpit, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
And that's kind of the 101 of inclusion, because this person felt disincluded. That's not the right word, is it? Doesn't sound right. Unincluded?
No, unincluded.
Not included. Yeah, she felt not included.
Yep, not included.
But that was just because she was expecting something and someone else wasn't providing it, but there was no communication.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the 101 of communication. And if we have more time, I'd love to talk to you about some of the more complex stuff around communication. And then trust is a fundamental. I need to trust you that when I divulge things that I'm in a safe space. I need to trust you from a competency perspective. Like I need to, if you're the director of finance, I need to be confident that you have, and to be able to trust in your technical skills. By the time we get to executive level, most of the time you can tick that off. Like the technical competency is typically there.
Yep.
So it's this trust in you as a person, trust in our relationship together, and trust in the strength of the team that, as you mentioned before, creates that psychological safe place. And so I typically do a bit of a self-diagnostic of the team when I start to look at that and a couple of other areas to work out where do we need to do the most work. And trust is sometimes, unless trust is seriously broken, trust is something that often comes when we work on the others. It's not an overt, think back to the 80s, we don't fall backwards and catch one another and, demonstrate trust. A trust comes when we show vulnerability and we work on the other things.
It's an interesting one. Yes, I do remember the old fallback stuff, and being a bigger guy, it was always very nervous at times then. Certainly had to be partnered appropriately, otherwise it could have got a little ugly, couldn't it? Would have had a casualty. Anyway, leave that alone. The trust piece is an interesting one, and a lot of organisations, I think trust is a word that's used a little too lightly and loosely at times, and not only in the sense of how it's held, but also in that people's, to go back to your earlier conversation around expectation. There's a piece of, and the other old chestnut, trust is earned, not given. Like all of these little chestnuts around trust. In the work you do, like how do you see that in teams? Because obviously trust is one of the pivotal or pillar type aspects to this. How do you see that playing out? What are the if we're going to be better, how do we work with this trust piece? Because it feels like one of those talked about and deeply misunderstood frames.
Yeah. To your point of, is trust earned or is it, are you giving it up front? I think there's two types of people. And I'm I'm picturing some kind of Pinterest quote that says, never trust anybody who says the world is divided into two types of people. So put that aside. People will have a trust profile that says, I give trust. And I will trust you until such time as you prove yourself untrustworthy. And that's my personal profile.
Yep.
And I remember having this conversation with my husband years ago. My husband grew up in a developing country. He was a guerrilla fighter before I met him, has had quite a difficult life. And he said to me once, you can afford to trust because you've had an easy life. And he comes from the other way of he's less inclined to trust. And once you've shown that you're trustworthy, so there's no right or wrong there. You need to know that if you're a new person in a team, for example, that some of them will trust you immediately and some of them won't. And it's not about you. It's actually about them. What happens next is about you, but it's what you walk into is about them. And I think trust comes from lots of small trust experiments, conscious and unconscious. Like sometimes we consciously do things to test things out. Sometimes we just do and we get a result that work over time. So if I can give you an example of something that I do with executive teams, typically not on the first date, I have to say. There has to be a level of trust
with you
from them to me. Yes, that I can keep the space safe for them. But I will, and I don't give them advance notice of this because some people just would worry too much, but I give them 20 minutes or so to think about 2 pieces of feedback for each person, things they do that support the team process, and 2 things that each person does that can sometimes detract from the team process. Now, this comes with a lot of framing up front around feedback reflects as much about you as it does about the person that you're giving it to, that some of the things that people do that might detract from team process, they're not doing deliberately, but perhaps they're not aware of it. And so we sit in a circle and we go around and we offer this feedback. And I remember, I can give you many examples, but one in particular where I set this all up. And the CEO took me aside and said, Corrinne, I don't think my team are ready for this. And I said, because I had said to him, we'll do a feedback activity. Yeah, that sounds like a good thing. I said, what makes you think that? And he gave me some examples. And I said, all right, good point. Can I give you some counter examples? Because I'd worked with them already for a couple of days and I gave him some counter examples. And I said to him, your team may not handle this. Every team I've ever worked with has. And how about you trust me and you trust yourself, because I think this was more about him than the team, and let's see what happens. And of course, it was totally fine. But what often comes out of that is people own new strengths. That thing that I thought, like in my case, I'm really warm and friendly. And I now know that that is actually a strength. But I didn't know once that that was a strength. I thought that everybody was warm and friendly. Like that comes so easily for me. It can't possibly be a strength. And so people actually own strengths. They might also say, 4 of you, there's 7 in the leadership team and 4 of you said that I dominate the conversation. I got that feedback 5 or 6 years ago and I worked on it and I thought I'd had it sorted. Maybe I need to work on it again now. Or sometimes it's, I knew that, but I didn't think anyone else could see it. And sometimes it's, that has come completely out of the blue for me. I wasn't aware, but 4 of you have said that. And so I think I need to do some more thinking about that. But that level of vulnerability, and it's vulnerability to give feedback, vulnerability to receive feedback, and even vulnerability to be witness to somebody giving someone else feedback. That level of shared vulnerability builds massive trust. After that activity, people feel so much more close and connected, as well as they have new levels of self-awareness, which then can impact, how they work within those other types of things that we've been talking about. And what might come out of that, back to the opening conversation about inclusion, is that one person actually doesn't feel included. Like I was working with an executive team a couple of months ago, and one of the executives got feedback from a few of his peers saying things along the lines of, you're great when we're having executive conversations around your area of expertise, but you don't contribute to conversations beyond that. And when you do, we all listen. So we want to hear more from you.
Yep.
And so that's a real opportunity for inclusion.
Yeah, what a gift.
Yeah.
But until, and I suspect in that feedback session, that person may not have ever had the opportunity to actually to stop and think about it and then call it out. Yes. To actually name those things and to, as you said, to kind of go, here's a strength and I'd like some more of it, please, because collectively it makes us better.
Yeah.
It actually builds the team. It creates a better environment, better conversation. And on the alternative side, here's some things that potentially make us less better.
Yeah.
They're problematic. And it's I can imagine there are times when that is quite a confronting thing. But if they're given with a sense of the framing you talk about, I think this is a really important thing Corrinne talked about. If people were ever, hey, we'll do that in our team.
Yeah, don't try this at home unless
yes.
it's really
yes.
good framing and you've got someone to hold the space for you. Once you've done this a few times with someone else, then you can do it as a team.
Yeah, so this is not the what the heck, let's give this a whirl Friday.
Yeah.
Because it has to be given in the sense of kindness, and kindness isn't nice, it's kind. And it's direct, and it's to the point, and it's not soft, easy, or nice. It's hard, and yet the gold that comes forth from it is just amazing. And I suspect the gift here is of teams that you work with. The next time you connect, and there's always fallback, or there's always a bit of reduction, but there's some of those things stay in place. Yeah. And going back there again quickly, watching the depth of conversation, like things deepen and widen. To use a different frame, the potential that was sitting there starts to be realised.
Yes. And the other thing is that this is the start of a conversation too, not the finish. So I tend to. So when I work with executive teams, typically it's 12 to 18 months to 2 years, and there's talk work between each time when we're together. And so the talk work involves a conversation that I need to make time for a coffee or a Zoom chat or a walk in the park or, whatever, a drink, whatever you do at your place, with each of my colleagues. And so the talk work that always comes after this kind of fearless feedback is what was not said in the conversation. What did you want to say, but you thought, I don't think I'm ready to say this today, or Andrew's not ready to hear this, or I don't think this is for consumption in the whole group. And sometimes those things are things that people admire as well as, well, this is a frustration. So what was not said and what's behind some of the things that were said? So that conversation then goes much deeper.
It's good. And that's the, as you said, there's that whole, it's not just what was able or people felt comfortable, especially in the early days, early engagement with this stuff. People, there's a lot of nervousness around this.
Yeah.
And I suspect on the other end of things, there's also folk who go, right, glad we did that. Back to the real work.
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing for me to learn there.
Yeah, kind of missed the point of what just happened. But again, that also tells the conversation around for people around what their motivation is, what their understanding of communication is, their alignment to the purpose. I know similarly doing similar type of work with clients, and this work, because the other side of the warning label on this bottle is you don't do it alone, don't do it with, make sure you get some help to hold the space. And the second part of it is be aware that this can lead to conversations that are deeply uncomfortable around suitability, engagement, or
totally
may or may not be here in 6 months, 3 months, 2 months. People having this type of depth, deepening and widening, sometimes people self-select or select.
I'm opting out. Yeah. I think I feel like I need to say too that giving and receiving feedback, you've said it's hard. Like it actually is hard. And it can be hard because of our wiring. For not all of us, but for many of us. Can I, a little bit of an admission, Andrew? I did a workshop for a client recently. It was online, and there was we did it 3 times, and there was, I don't know, 40 or 50 people in each group. And part of this was around fearless conversations and asking for feedback. How do you ask for feedback? And then how do you receive that feedback? It wasn't about giving feedback in this one. It was actually about asking for feedback and receiving feedback. And then a week or so later, I got a phone message, and it was a person ringing up, introduced themselves, where they were from, and it was from this organisation. And you know where you can tell when someone's ringing you up and they're nervous? So, hi, Corrinne, really enjoyed the workshop, got a lot out of it, and I'd really like to talk to you because in the interest of feedback, I've got some feedback for you. And I thought, okay, right, call her back. But I could feel myself going, ooh, what's she going to say? Was it terrible? Did I offend anybody? Was it? And my heart rate went up massively. And the irony of that wasn't lost. And it turns out, and this is sort of looping back to inclusion too, as a different illustration of inclusion. Her feedback to me was that the images in the PowerPoint were all white Caucasian. And that this person's partner, who is not white Caucasian, would not have seen himself in any of my images. Now, that for me was quite, when she said it, it was, oh my God, you are so right. I can't believe you've had to give me that feedback, because my house is a mini UN. My husband is from Myanmar. He's Burmese, so he's quite dark-skinned. My youngest child has Sri Lankan birth parents. She has dark skin. My eldest child is half Asian. So my family would not have seen themselves represented in my slides. And like, I bang on about inclusion.
It's it's that piece around, and it's beautiful for the transparency, because I think the lesson in that little piece for me is, here's someone who does this work and does it beautifully, but doesn't. But still has this. But he's
human
spot.
And flawed, and
and there's confirmation bias that sits deep underneath where isn't this a normal thing? And that whole group of sets of 50s, one person.
Yeah.
One person called out.
What was really interesting, Andrew, is that I've thought about this, and I actually did a LinkedIn post last week, because I thought, this is really good feedback, and I'm going to, in the interest of helping the conversation around inclusion, I'm going to call it out. So basically did a post just telling that story. And I was looking at it yesterday morning, and one woman from another organisation, different program, different organisation, so different set of slides, who is African. And I can't be more specific than that. And now I'm feeling uncomfortable that I can't be more specific than that, but I can't. She put a comment on my LinkedIn post saying, Corrinne, I noticed that and I should have given you that feedback and I didn't. But then she said, your style is so inclusive. Your slides and your images were not inclusive, but you are inclusive, which was really nice. That was affirming feedback. But I thought that's really fascinating that Mabel noticed, presumably wanted to say something and didn't, and now then said, yes, I saw that too. So, interesting. So my point actually wasn't so much about that. It was about the feedback. Like, I talk about feedback. I invite feedback. I train feedback. And when someone offers me feedback, I go, I hope this is going to be all right.
I hope it's okay.
Yeah. So if anybody is sitting around their executive team table or any table thinking, oh, I think feedback is hard and she sounds like she's making it easy. No, I'm not making it easy. I know it's hard, and it's hard for me too.
I think it's, and if I would go a little bit further and say if feedback is that easy, or if giving or receiving, it's possibly a little too shallow, or it's also possibly not on target as well, because normally with feedback that's useful has a level of discomfort.
Totally. And the return on investment for asking for and receiving and then doing something with feedback is massive. And there's a cost. Like, even if I think about this feedback on my slides, that has a time cost now, because every slide deck I'm looking at thinking, is this good enough? And it's not about, has it got a token Asian in it? You know, is there someone dark? It's, would an Australian audience see themselves represented in this in some way? And I put lots of thought into my slides and my images, but up until now it's been, what concept am I trying to illustrate, and how does that image fit in the flow of the other images? So now I've got another sort of overlay to look at, but that's really useful.
Yeah, it is.
So the return on investment is great.
Yeah, it is. And again, on the journey of better, these are the kind of things that are stepping stones to get there. And it isn't a destination, it's the journey. It's kind of a wanky statement people talk about, but this really is. You don't have a session and glad we cleared the air, it's all good now, let's move on. It's part of how you now do business better is by doing the people better. Working with that leadership team, my peers, my leader, my boss, my number one team. How do I then, I guess the other piece is, and it's the gift that you bring, is take this, and as you start to lead the team you lead, your second team or the team that you help lead, how do you do the change there?
Yes.
Because it isn't often, the gift isn't just to, you see, I'm sure you see this, I certainly have, the leadership team kind of revels in the joy of the experience and it stops. And it's like, well, how does this, so this team might be better, but the business isn't getting better. How do you, is that something you see and consider with the teams you work with?
Absolutely. And it starts right at the start. So it might be, for example, we talked about team norms or the leadership team purpose. And there'll be a discussion around, let's tell everybody this is our purpose. And someone else will say, I'd rather we just shift our behavior and then they see it. So it's like, to what level are we communicating? We're now a strong aligned executive team and these are our 5 key principles. And to what extent do we live into that and it becomes obvious to people? And what are the conversations that each of you are having with your teams? And I know one of the things I love most is when I get an email or a phone call from somebody who's worked with me telling me how they've taken an element of what we've done and done it with their team. And this is what happened. One of my clients is a utilities company. And when I started working with them, they used OCI to measure their culture. And they were hoping to improve the culture at the executive level and possibly impact the next level of leaders. And then when they had an OCI, I think about 2.5 years in, it flowed right through to 3 levels of leadership. You could see the impact of their new way of working together. Because I'm sure you would see this. When someone on the executive team comes to you and says, we need help because our middle level managers aren't communicating and they're playing turf wars, my immediate thought in my head is, yes, you do need help. And I bet the help is not needed at the middle level, because the only reason middle level leaders don't work well is because the executives aren't working well together. And just even actually, this same utilities company actually, I remember we'd been working together for about 6 months, and they had a staff briefing. And what they would normally do in that is 2 executives would go around to various sites and do this staff briefing. And they decided to make a massive investment, and they would all go. And that's multiple sites. That's a significant investment to take all the executive team out to do this. And they decided that that was worth it. And they were delighted that they got feedback like, you guys look like you were having fun together. And the executive team looks like they like one another. Now, you would hope that is the case, but in this organisation under a previous CEO, that wasn't the case. It was very much divide and conquer. There was not a collegiate culture. And so just the junior leaders across the organisation seeing the executives relating, to go back to your language before, kindly to one another, sets a whole new tone.
It's fascinating to see, isn't it? And that people often want to implement these big culture programs, and I'm sure you see this too. And it's like, great, let's start talking about how you talk to each other. So I had similar experience with a big mining organisation who approached us and said, the frontline people in the workforce, frontline supervisors, they don't know how to lead, they don't know how to manage, it's a bit hopeless. And I'm summarising, I said it a little bit kindly, but that's what they were saying. Well, they actually weren't saying kindly, they were saying it nicely. And sort of said, first question for me was, so how is your leadership team going, the exec team? I know we're good, we're fine.
Yeah. Nothing to see here.
Yeah, nothing to see here. Interesting. So, yeah, we're really interested in helping this team, but to do that, we need to start with your team. I don't think you understand. We want these people fixed. I understand. And we'll start here because leadership's done through example, and depending upon your framing service to this behaviour will be an echo of how you people are behaving, your team, your group. You don't understand. Cool. Thanks very much. Have a great day. And they just could not see that how they, as an exec team, behaviour was impacting the whole organisation.
Yeah.
And also, we're good, thank you, move on. And it's an interesting piece. You walk away from a cracking piece of work because it's not going to be necessarily impactful. This isn't going to make, so there will be some improvement, some betterment of those people, but it won't be sustainable, and it won't necessarily be legacy because the organisation. We're not
changing the environment around them. Yeah,
correct.
And I think that's really powerful when you are able to say, this work is not for me. This work is not for me because there's someone who can do it better than me. Let me introduce you to my good friend, Andrew Deering. This is his expertise. He can do this work. Or, as you've said, I can't make the impact here that you want because you're not willing to work where the problem is.
Yeah, and yes, you're right. And that is also another, really useful piece where in organisation, either outside help or in organisation, you can't be all things to all people. To get better, you have to understand, going way back to your framing around, motivators and alignment to purpose and how we communicate and the trust, understanding that there's a bunch of people and they're all a wee bit different, or I certainly hope they are. Because if they're not, life can go. To be perfectly honest, I would hate to work with me. It just would be. If I had a table full of me, it'd drive me nuts. Drive all of us nuts. And that's the beautiful thing about the I. So we go to the start. The gift of better that sits inside inclusion and diversity on every level of an organisation, as much as you are able, just brings deep richness. And it isn't, and this is, again, what you said was just beautiful way back then, Corrinne, was understanding that that isn't easy. People put these diversity things in and then, right, we're diverse, go.
Yay. Yeah.
And then watch things break often because we're not mindful of what the energy and the deliberateness and inclusion can take.
Yeah. It takes courage to be included. It takes courage to speak out when you're not sure how your voice is going to be heard. But it also takes courage to include other people. Like if I'm going to ask you what you think or invite you to be part of a something, then I might need to shift my own beliefs.
Yes.
I've taken a long time to develop these beliefs. They're serving me very well. Thank you very much.
Yes,
so
especially at senior levels.
Courage. Yes.
Especially at senior levels, what got me here is pretty significant.
Yes. Yeah.
Have a look at my title.
Yeah.
It's big and shiny and sometimes has an E in front of the GM, and I'm important now. And I don't mean to be dismissive of people. It's not about that, but it's just, is that actually becoming your limit? And the tension I love talking about with organizations is when we want to be best practice, world's best class, whatever best. When I hear that frame, I often say to people, I'm so disappointed to hear that you just want to be best. That is such a disappointment, and I'm really sad for you. What are you talking about? Well, to me, best is a destination and end. It's not a journey. And I'm wondering why you wouldn't want to just continually be better. And I think in leadership teams, and particularly executive teams, people have done really well to get there. However, they're senior roles. And as you said, technically they're usually pretty good because they've had to be at some space. But has that become a best thing such that better is hard? I know I'm sitting at the top of this particular structure. Look at me. Well done, Tiger. But does that actually limit you from better?
Yeah.
Is there potential of that? Because in your silo or your construct, you're best. You won.
It reminds me of a book you said, What Got Me Here. So Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. One of the things that he talks about in that book is when you get to executive level, it's really important to make the distinctions between what are you successful because of and what are you successful in spite of? Because we think that some of our strongest characteristics are the causes of our success, and some of them certainly will be, but others we've been successful in spite of those things because there are other things around us. And helping senior people start to deconstruct, particularly as the context changes, because what made me successful in this context may not make me successful in that context. Yeah. That's really challenging. Well, people love working with me because they know where they stand because I tell it like it is. Yeah, sure you do, but there's this trail of carnage behind you.
Yeah.
Imagine how successful you could have been if you were as decisive and as strategically brilliant and all of those other things and showed a little compassion as well.
And those pieces that they are unaware of or in spite of, to use the conversation you do around fearless leadership, people are often really scared of those things because of introducing those things in. Yeah. Because it's, hang on a minute, but I won the battle to be here. I use that word deliberately. I won the battle to be here at this seat by not doing that. You're asking me to engage with some of that. I'm a little scared, which is why your frame, fearless leadership. Yeah. It's when you're getting to that, whatever level you are, whatever where you want to be, being willing to engage with things that make you a little afraid, and stepping through that. Which I can see. I can only imagine you sitting in a leadership team and helping people on that journey, because there is, and it's real. Fear, false expectations appearing real, whatever your acronym for fear is. Yeah. Nonetheless, it feels real. Yeah. That's even your, hey, Corrinne, I'd like to give you some feedback. And I similarly, I've had the same thing. It's like, oh, damn, I missed a call. I know. What are they going to say? And ultimately, reflectively, you go, who cares? Yeah. Well, I did. And there was a bit of fear there. And so as a leader, how do you get through that fear to go to the other side of it?
Yeah. And I always say that fearless leadership is not the total absence of fear. Because if there's totally no fear, then you're either dead or dead drunk. And neither of those are useful states for leadership. So it's about fearing less. It's about really getting lots of different data sources, quantitative and qualitative data. And your fear is another data source. So use that fear and as a data source and help that. And it's fearing less.
Yeah, that is beautiful, and it is the piece around. It isn't denial; it's acknowledgement of and working with to go through, past, around. But it's not about ignoring. It's not about trying to kill it. It's not trying to break it. It's recognizing that it's real.
Yeah,
and that's okay. There are some things that all of us, if you don't have any fear, otherwise you're either dead or dead drunk, or maybe a bit of sociopathic issue. But one of the pathics that aren't so helpful, not empathic, but the other end of it. But it is that piece where we all have it. We all have fear. We all deal with it. And to be better, you have to be willing to at least, I've got this little picture, a bit of a Star Wars nut, but old Luke Skywalker going into the little cave on the planet wherever Yoda was and having to face himself. But being willing to go there. And usually the scariest part of any challenge is actually ourselves and our own stories and our own views and our own frames. It's not the others. We sometimes blame them, and to be better, you just got to go there sometimes. That's brilliant. And I'm mindful of time, and I just really want to sort of collectively say just a bunch of really interesting conversation, and it's deeply useful for people. My one question, which I ask at the end of this, and I know I haven't forewarned Corrinne, so sorry, and you're welcome, is one thought for today, tomorrow, this week. If you could leave with people that, like, if just hang on to this piece, that might be a useful piece for people, what would be your sort of your final frame to put you on the spot?
There is no courage without fear. Like, courage is the flip side of fear. What takes courage for me may be a walk in the park for you. So we all we have fear around different things, and we need courage for different things. So my invitation for you, anyone who's listening this week, is find a little courage experiment. Do something in your leadership that takes courage. It might be offering someone else some feedback. It might be asking for some feedback. It might be stepping out and speaking publicly on something. It might be shutting up. Maybe it's just shutting up. Have a little experiment with something that requires courage from you.
That's a cracker. That's something for everyone to grab hold of if they choose. And just looking for that experiment around courage. Well, thank you, Corrinne. So I guess the other piece is, as we said earlier, you've got a couple of books out there that are deeply useful. I can see them in the background. And if people want to reach out and say g'day or seek to do work with you, obviously they go to your website.
Corrinne Armour, CorrinneArmour.com.
Which again we'll stick in the show notes. I'm getting better.
Or LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn. Please send a message. Please reach out. Always happy. You're always keen to do work in this space and help organisations develop their own approach to fearless leadership, and to, for the frame I would use, for them to be better and for them to have the business to be better.
Totally.
And to go right back to your start comment, spot on, it's all about people. Businesses are nothing more than a collective bunch of folk. So thank you very much for your time, Corrinne.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
No, you're welcome. It's just amazing. Had a great time, and I think people will really enjoy this conversation. Thank you. And to everyone else, have a great week, and until next time, and we chat again.